and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Alex Frederick, Bereavement Coordinator at Lifeline of Ohio. Before we get started today, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. We want you to feel as though you're able to participate during the event. So I'd like to highlight one important feature using Zoom. Using the chat feature, you can share a comment by selecting to send a message to all panelists and attendees, which will send a message to everyone presenting and everyone watching the video today. If you're using your computer, you will see the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Or if you are using your phone, you will tap the screen and the chat feature will appear. Just remember to close out the chat feature when you're done commenting, so you'll be able to see the video screen again. You may notice the feature to raise your hand. However, we will not be using this feature during our event. And lastly, we'll be recording today's event for those who aren't able to join with us today. Now that we've covered what you'll need to know about Zoom, I'd like to officially welcome you to this year's virtual donor family reception. Myself, my coworker Mallory, and all of us at Lifeline of Ohio are deeply honored to join with you together today. As we looked forward to this special event, none of us ever anticipated that it would be virtual, yet here we are. This year has been filled with much uncertainty and many challenges, but the one constant that doesn't change is that your loved one mattered. They are loved, they are missed, and they are never forgotten. Coping with uncertainty, unknowns, and devastation is something that is not new to your grieving hearts. You have experienced a loss of someone precious to you, and you have endured in the midst of this new reality without them. We are so grateful for the opportunity to come together today to honor your loved one's life and legacy. Today is about them, saying their name, recognizing them as a hero, and finding ways to continue your relationship and your bond with them. Today is also about all of you. Each one of you is connected. Your families and your stories, though they are uniquely different, they also carry a similar thread. We join together today as one to recognize the incredible impact that your loved one has forever made on so many others. We walk along this journey of grief, loss, sorrow, together and united. We are here for you, and we hope that this event provides some measure of comfort, solace, and a sense of belonging. Thank you for being here with us today. I'd now like to welcome Mallory Flynn.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Mallory Flynn, and like Alex said, I'm also a bereavement coordinator with Lifeline of Ohio. I'm so grateful and so humbled to be here with you all today. Recently, I was thinking about this past year and all of the unexpected changes that have come our way. And I was reminded how much like grief, these adjustments to our daily lives are. Loss changes you, grief shapes you, and mourning a loved one is an experience that brings on highs and lows, peaks and valleys, tidal waves of emotion that can appear out of nowhere and knock you off your feet, much like what we've all been experiencing the past several months. We see your posts in our Facebook group, sharing your vulnerabilities with us. We hear your tears over a phone call while you're telling us a story. We acknowledge that this pain is like no other. Our goal in the work that we do here at Lifeline of Ohio is to provide a safe, compassionate space for donor families to grieve, especially on those days that feel a little bit longer and a little bit harder. This is why it's so important for us to come together today, even if the way we meet looks and feels different. Despite all of the change and the worry of what comes next, I want you to remember that your loved one's legacy never changes. They are heroes through and through. And we hope that you'll let that be a light that guides you through those dark days. Whether virtually or in person, we'll always be here to support you, and we will continue to say your loved one's name. We will always remember them. Thank you.
As Mallory and I have shared with you, saying your loved one's name is invaluable in staying connected to them and their memory. I'd like to introduce two of Lifeline of Ohio's staff who are so dedicated to the mission of Lifeline and so dedicated to keeping your loved one's legacy alive. Cindy Heck, who works as a family service coordinator, and Amanda Anger, who works as a donation support services coordinator. Both Cindy and Amanda work daily, either in person or on the phone, to talk with and support our families on the most difficult of days. Please welcome Cindy and Amanda.
Thank you, Alex. And thanks to each of you for joining us for today's event. Amanda and I are so honored to be a part of this special celebration to read the names of your loved ones and heroes of donation and spirit. As we read the names of your loved ones, we will also be showing a slideshow with their photos. Their names will appear in alphabetical order by last name. We honor and we remember. Terry Atkins. Stephanie Amon. Sean Atkinson, Sr. Maria Barroso. Brandon R. Baxter III.
Amanda Beasley Donahue. Carolyn L. Bethel. Christy Bender. Matthew Bishop. Melissa E.
Eric Baumgartner. John F. Burgess. Jackson Kane. Benji Ray Cottle. Timothy M. Cleveland.
Diana L. Conkle. Douglas David Conley. David Michael Cook. Randall Cowman. Christina Crutchfield.
Michael A. Cunningham. Dan Davies. Randall Davis. Kathy Lee Denman.
Pamela Dillinger. Terry Douglas Disbennett. Michael Donahoe. Bob Dudson. Zachary Eck.
Paul Amos. Chase Fink. Larry Flaherty. Michael Franco III. Shaitea Fuller.
Gabriella Nicole Garvin. Zachary George. Claire Glass. Thomas M. Haney. Daniel Franklin Hark.
Brian Harper. Joseph Jabo Hayes. Riley Ann Hefner. Gregory Henry. Sean Henthorn.
William Hope. Weldon Garcia Hudspeth. Jojo Kevin Hughes. Courtney Lee Hunt. Lindsay Alice Jones.
Jeffrey W. Kerr. Lisa Marie Klein. Vince Koza. Jeffrey M. Lang. Joyce Layton.
Joel Liston. Maggie Lyons. Frank Manos. Rocky McVeigh. Tom Metters.
Liv Midnight. Greg Miller. Alicia Mills. Clyde R. Mills, Jr. Nancy Neiman.
Jacob Old. Tyler Penny. Keegan Poe. Karen L. Queen. Hugh Reasoner.
John Reasoner. Richard Ryder. Meg Remick. Calvin River Richards. Benjamin Ritchie.
Linda Reinhardt. Connor Robinson. Sarah Rose Miko Rupel. Gavin Rudder. Sydney McKeon Sapp.
Alex Searles. Forrest J. Seitz, Jr. Timothy Mark Shaver. Robert Mike Shoemaker. Anthony Schroyer.
Brandon Reed Smith. Bruce Starks III. Lydia Stewart. Carol Suttles. Elise Swingle.
Matthew Trent Sacker. Douglas J. Feast. Ryan Leo Tullius. Michael Waller. Hadassah Williams.
Michael A. Wise. If there are any families here joining us today that we did not name your loved one, please take the time now to write it in the comments so we can say it aloud. Thank you. Oh, Randy Whittingham, Cassandra Springer. Thank you. Robert P. Smith. Christina Gayhart, Dottie Berle. Robert P. Smith. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cindy and Amanda. At this time, we'd like to do a brief candlelight ceremony by lighting a candle in honor of all of our organ donors, eye and tissue donors, and donors in spirit. As we light each candle, We invite you to take a moment of reflection, followed by a moment of silence, to honor all of our heroes. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex and Amanda and Joyce, and just for bearing with us during any of these little technical glitches that we've run into. This is our first big event of this kind of scale, so thank you so much. That was beautiful. What a lovely dedication to all of our heroes. We're so excited to share with you a sneak peek from our special project, Family to Family, a Donor Family Cookbook. On the next slide, you'll see the cover of our cookbook, which I think beautifully symbolizes families, especially those brought together by the connection that is donation, like all of you, coming together around the table. And I think that kind of looks like what we're doing here today. It's just a little bit different. This project was inspired by a similar cookbook that was produced by Lifeline of Ohio many years ago with the help of a special member of our governing board of directors, Kathy Harrington, whose daughter Lindsay became a hero of donation in 2002. You'll be able to read more about Kathy's story in our cookbook, but we want to say a special thank you to Kathy and to all the other members of the MOD Squad, which stands for Mothers of Donors, for creating your cookbook several years ago. It was truly a source of inspiration as we began crafting this new version. In this book, you'll find stories of loss and love, pain and joy, and of course, lots of food. The beautiful artwork throughout the book was created by Kate Schumacher, a talented watercolorist and former community outreach coordinator with Lifeline of Ohio. You'll see your loved one's name, story, and photo on the left side of the book, with your special recipe on the right. We felt so honored to create this alongside you, and it's our hope that as you make these dishes, either on your own or with your family, you'll not only remember your hero, but all of the other heroes mentioned in the book. For everyone who submitted an RSVP to this event, please keep an eye out in the following weeks for your copy of the book. We also want to thank our friends at What's Your Grief for the inspiration through their grief recipe blog series. We thought it only fitting that we invite them to be part of our event today. I'd now like to introduce Eleanor Haley and Lisa Williams, founders of the popular blog What's Your Grief, to share with us today about continuing relationships with our loved ones who have died, a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. Welcome, Eleanor and Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you. First, we'd like to thank the Lifeline community for inviting us to be a part of this beautiful event. Many things have been put on hold by the COVID-19 crisis, but your grief hasn't, nor has your love for the person that you're here honoring and remembering today, which is why gatherings like these, where people can come together and connect over their grief and can honor and remember their loved ones, are so special. As Mallory shared, I'm Eleanor Haley, and Lisa and I are the co-founders of the organization and online community What's Your Grief. Before starting What's Your Grief, Lisa and I met working for the donor program in Baltimore, Maryland. While there, we had the privilege of providing support and assistance to families of organ and tissue donors. Families who, like you, on their very worst day, put their immediate needs aside so someone else might be helped through donation. In our work, Litsa and I have observed that at times of trauma and crisis, humans can be pretty self-protective. It's instinctual to want to take care of yourself and those closest to you. So to say on your darkest day, I'm going to offer the light of hope to someone else, that's truly an act of selfless humanity. Needless to say, we were regularly inspired by the people we met through our work. I guess by everyone involved, really. Of course, by the brave family members that we were meeting and who were grieving, but also by the loved ones who they were grieving. The people who made or inspired the decision to say yes to donation. Though we'd never be lucky enough to meet these brothers, sons, daughters, grandparents, we got to know them through their family stories. And through these stories, we began to understand where families were drawing their strength. Because as they often shared with us, things like, it's what Dad would have wanted, or that's who Grandma was. She would have done anything to help others. Or, of course, my sister was registered. She always made the world better for other people. I'm sure many of you have similar thoughts about your loved one. And so we invite you now, if you're open to it, but no pressure if you're not, to share one thing that helped guide you and your family in supporting donation. Something that inspired you or brought you comfort in the decision. Maybe it was a value that your loved one always lived by. Maybe it's a memory you had of their generosity, a conversation that you had with them, or just a general way of being, the way that they lived their life. Or of course, even their donor designation. So if you feel open to it, please share right now something in the chat. While you do that, there's one more thing I want to share with you about Litsa and my history. We were coworkers initially, and I guess we're still coworkers. But over time, we also became what we like to call grief friends. Grief friends are what we call those people that you meet, often after your loved one has died, who get it with a capital I. Litsa and I both had experienced a parent's death in early adulthood, which obviously shaped how we did our job. When you've experienced the death of someone you love, it changes the lens through which you see almost everything. And as we slowly started to share more and more about our personal grief experiences, we realized our lenses were pretty similar when it came to grief. And let me tell you, and as many of you maybe already know, it is such a relief to find someone you can be your normal old grieving self with. You know what I mean? Someone who you can talk to about your loved one without it getting awkward. Someone who lets you know their loved one through their stories. Someone who doesn't think it's weird when you tell them you drink out of your late husband's coffee mug every morning, or who doesn't bat an eye when you share that you make your son's favorite cookies on his birthday every year, even though it's 10 years since he died. Before experiencing the death of someone you love, these things may have seemed strange or abnormal to you as well. But now, I'm willing to bet that you get it. You may not know what's behind the unique little rituals and actions that keep a person connected to their loved one, but you understand why they do it. You understand the desire, that instinct really, to stay connected through stories, memories, traditions, and habits.
And I think as we think about those connections and when we think about those memories, habits, all of those little things, it always makes me reflect back into my own loss and to think about when I learned about a concept that we call continuing bonds theory. I don't remember when I first learned about this, but in the early days of my grief, I know that for me personally, the only thing I knew about loss and about grief was this idea of the 5 stages of grief. And so often in working with donor families and with others, that's what I heard from them. What they knew was the 5 stages. That was what was guiding them or what they expected. But so many of them said the same thing to me that I remembered feeling, which was that my grief didn't look like the 5 stages. It didn't fit into this neat, tidy little package that the 5 stages suggested. And I found myself looking for those connections and rituals, and I was dreading the idea that acceptance in the 5 stages meant letting go of connections. Luckily, somewhere along the way, I learned that modern grief theory has come a long, long way from the 5 stages of grief. And Eleanor and I have spent a lot of time talking to other people about that, about those changes, because when we learned that, I think we both heaved a sigh of relief, knowing that it was normal to be seeking connections, to be seeking those memories and traditions, not to be looking for a way to put our loss behind us. About 25 years ago, grief experts, researchers, and clinicians, they started noticing this important thing when working with people who were grieving. Even though they had been told that people should be working towards acceptance and we should be helping them to move on and let go, what they found was that most people were actually not detaching from the person who died and putting their energy into new things. They found that most people, both children and adults, created ongoing connections with the person that they lost. And they carried those connections not just for weeks or for months or even years, but they carried those connections for decades and in many cases for a lifetime. They found that those connections were actually what brought people the most comfort in the most difficult moments of their lives going forward. So these researchers, they kept talking and watching and doing research, and eventually they named their theory continuing bonds theory. They turned everything that society and therapists and other grief researchers had believed about grief completely onto its head. And they said that grief is not about disconnecting from the people who've died. Grief is about our natural connection to and our relationship with people who died. Like this quote on the screen, "Death ends a life, not a relationship." To most of you, this might seem obvious. The moment when you spoke to someone at the hospital or on the phone about donation, it was likely the first of countless ways that you began continuing your connection with your loved one after they died. It was one of the first moments that their legacy was able to continue in the world. Whether they were physically able to be a donor or whether they were a donor in spirit, that decision that they made or that you made on their behalf continues their values in the world. The things that I just saw a few of you shared in the chat, those are the spirit that continues in the world through that decision. As we gather together, honoring, remembering, seeing the power of these shared stories of donation and of those decisions and values, there's this amazing comfort in having a community together, all of us grieving different losses and appreciating the incredible gift that was given. So often we think about the ways that we will honor and remember our loved ones as these big collective events. And they are incredible and meaningful, especially right now when the world can feel incredibly disconnected and isolated. But when we look at the ways that your loved one will continue in the world, their legacy and your connection with them, many times it's actually small, individual, everyday events that keep us connected with our loved one, not just these big events. It's small, everyday connections that happen through the things that they taught you, the stories that you tell about them, the places that you go that you used to go together, or maybe that you travel to where they never were able to go, but always wanted to go. In the weird, quirky expressions that you use that they always used, or the keychain that you carry that was their keychain, and the foods that you make because of them, the values that you live with them in mind. It's these everyday things that are part of your world now that continue your connection with them. And those things will come and go and evolve in different ways over the years. These are the things that often we think are kind of weird and crazy. Sometimes we don't even talk about these little individual connections with our loved ones because we feel so strange about them. But really, this is one of the most natural parts of continuing bonds in grief. Those researchers who taught us that continuing bonds was important and normal and natural and the way that grief could look for so many of us, they also taught us that the rituals and connections that mean the most and are the most comforting to us in our grief are often the private, individual, everyday rituals. Several large studies at Harvard found that 90 to 90% of the rituals and continued connections that people found the most important in their grief were actually private, individual rituals that they did without anyone else knowing about it. I remember first reading that and finding it incredibly surprising, and yet having it make total sense, which is very much what the researchers thought as well. In many ways, these big gatherings are so important when they do happen, but the everyday is what comforts us and reminds us that our relationship with our loved one continues. I think also that divide between public and private, it's not quite as big as the researchers made it sound. It's a little bit blurrier. As Eleanor and I looked through the incredible cookbook that you all have put together, filled with stories and memories and these foods that so viscerally remind you of your loved ones and families, I was struck by how blurred the lines are. Every time I eat a piece of coconut cake, I think of my dad because it was his favorite. I also still make his make coconut cake on his birthday every year, even though my dad died when I was a teenager. It's been 20 years and still on his birthday, I make coconut cake. I often share that with my family, but I also share it with people who never even knew my dad. And I share it as a way and a reason to tell stories about him and let them get to know him through me. I know Eleanor makes holiday cookies with her girls, just like she made holiday cookies with her mom. And even though her girls never got to meet her mom, through that food, through that ritual, through that tradition, not only does she continue her bond with her mom, but now her girls continue their bond with their grandmother, who they were never able to meet. In this cookbook, you've all shared a little piece of your family with each other. A reminder that grief and our loved ones and our memories and connections are all completely unique. And at the same time, there's something shared in our love and our loss that can bring us together. The foods that you make and share, they can both be individual and collective, private and shared. And this cookbook, what those recipes represent, can be a map for so many other rituals and connections that you have with your loved ones. Some of them will always be little private individual things. Some will be things you share with friends and family, some with community and with others. So being here today, we've come together to share your loved one's legacy of generosity through donation. But we also want to take a moment to normalize, acknowledge, and share with each other all these little other continued connections that will live on. We invite you to share one thing in the chat, big or small, weird or quirky, something, maybe that you don't share very often. If you're comfortable, whether it's like Eleanor said, drinking out of their mug, wearing a piece of jewelry, finishing a project they never finished, an expression you use that they use, their favorite song that you listen to, anything that you want to share, an event that you've started, a memorial, we invite you to share that in the chat right now. Because though donation is one way your loved one's legacy continues in the world, there are tens of thousands of other ways you will continue their legacy through your continued bond with them. So please take a moment, and if you're comfortable, share in the chat one other way that you continue your bond. Oh, I love these.
Sorry. As everybody's sharing, I'll just direct your attention to the slide that we've shared here. That is at the bottom there, whatsyourgrief.com is our website where you can check out what we do. We have hundreds of free articles for grieving people, a podcast, all sorts of things. And also we do a recipe project. It's called the Grief Recipe Project. And a couple of other different creative expression type of projects, some around photography and writing. So if you're interested in submitting whatever recipe that you shared here in the cookbook or anyone in general, we invite you to share it with us as well. We do share them on our website. So it's just one more way to share your memory and your connections with the world. And everybody's sharing, and I hope everybody's having an opportunity to share and to read and connect and see all the lovely and wonderful ways that people are able to connect and find comfort in their continued bond. As I look at all of your responses, I'm reminded that really at the heart of it, grief is love. It's love's unwillingness to give up. It's the stretching of bonds. It's the redefining of limits so that you can have a relationship with somebody despite their physical absence. Your loved one isn't physically here to look at, to talk to hold, and I know that that hurts like crazy, but always remember that they're connected to this world in countless ways, and through you, their family, their friends, through their gift of life, through their legacy of hope and generosity, they're connected to this world and they live on. Thank you.
Wow, what powerful, powerful words. Thank you so much, Eleanor and Litsa, for sharing that with us today. Before we go to the end of our program and our last section that we're going to review, I just wanted to point out a few things. I just wanted to remind you that when you're using the chat feature, to make sure that you're clicking on the option to share your comments with all the panelists and attendees. That way, everyone who's joining us today can see those comments. And I also want to take a moment before we continue on to read a few names that we had missed. And again, as Mallory said earlier, thank you all so much for being so patient with us. I'd like to read Dottie Berkeley McCoy, Nick Gear, Leif R. Barnett Jr., and Jennifer Deal. So as many of you know, Lifeline of Ohio has a donor memorial quilt program. The first quilt was made in 1999 as a way of honoring and remembering our donors and donors in spirit who selflessly gave the gift of life and healing to countless others. Now, over 20 years later, this unique memorial has grown to include 15 lovingly crafted quilts. These quilts are truly a labor of love. Every stitch represents how your loved one is knit into the hearts and lives of so many. Each quilt shares the story of the one who is never forgotten and who is always treasured. Each quilt square captures a glimpse into the donor's life, personality, and what was most cherished by them. The donor memorial quilts are on display at Lifeline of Ohio when they are not traveling across our service area to be shown at community events, BMVs, hospitals, libraries, fairs, churches, and schools. These quilts are seen as a tribute to honor the spirit of our donors, and they touch the hearts of all who see them. This year, we are honored to unveil our 15th memorial quilt titled Patterns of Love. Please enjoy this short video showing for the first time all of the lovingly crafted squares that make up this beautiful quilt. Whew, how beautiful. I cannot begin to express how moving it is to see this beautiful quilt come together. And it could not have been without the amazing help and love and care that are two volunteers who knit this quilt together. I'd like to express my deep gratitude for our two volunteers, Jolene Penny, who is a donor mom, and recipient wife, Patsy Farmer. As you can see, they're in the photo here, and I would like to just read a few words that each of them shared about participating in creating this beautiful quilt. A note from Jolene. She shared that our son, Tyler, became a donor hero 2 years ago. Since then, I have been so appreciative of the support and care offered by Lifeline of Ohio. I am an avid sewer and quilter, and helping with the donor quilt is a way that I can personally give back. The quilt this year is special to me as it includes Tyler's quilt square. And Patsy shared, sewing has always been a love of mine. I signed up years ago to be an organ donor, but in 2017, my husband was given the gift of a kidney by a very special friend as a living donor. At that time, my focus changed. I wanted to use my quilting as a way to help others. I felt honored and humbled to have worked on this piece of art. I found myself getting emotional as I worked on each block because they tell the story of each wonderful and giving person who made a decision to give the ultimate final gift. I hope when seeing this quilt, it will be a comfort to you and encourage others to donate the gift of life. Thank you. And now, before I invite our CEO to close out our program, I'd like to just remind you that if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Mallory and I. She has shared our combined email, which is bereavementservices@lifelineofohio.org in the comments in the chat feature. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. I'd like to now turn it over to Kent Holloway, CEO of Lifeline of Ohio, to close out our program.
Thank you. It's sad that we can't see this beautiful quilt in person, but what a great display and visual for today's event. So thank you everyone for making that possible. On behalf of the entire staff, I want to thank you for joining us today. Honoring our donors and their gifts is at the core of Lifeline of Ohio's culture. We're witnesses daily to the way our loved ones, your loved ones, donations transform the lives of others in our community and beyond, and we are so grateful. Although this year is different than most, please know that we are still here to support you. And while our offices remain closed to the public, our donor memorial is open 24/7 for visitors. We invite you to travel to our building to see your loved one's name on the memorial and take time to reflect on their lives and their gifts that they gave. Lifeline of Ohio has been privileged to be the stewards of your loved one's gifts of life through donation, and we thank you for joining us today to remember that.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. We're so grateful that you could be here with us today. We love you, and we're thinking of you.
Bye, everyone.